When Paul Walker notices a young mother counting coins at a grocery store checkout while her hungry children wait quietly behind her, what begins as a simple act of kindness turns into something much deeper that will change all their lives forever, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles, and showing us that real strength isn't about fame or fortune, but about recognizing when someone needs help, and having the courage to step forward even when no one is watching. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as evening shoppers moved through the aisles of Ralph's grocery store in Santa Monica. It was the kind of ordinary Tuesday night when most people were focused on getting home to dinner and television, rushing through their routines without really seeing the world around them. But Paul Walker had never been most people. Paul pushed his cart slowly through the produce section, taking his time to select vegetables for the simple dinner he planned to cook at home. He wore what he always wore when he wasn't working: faded jeans, a gray Henley shirt, and worn sneakers that had walked thousands of miles. His hair was slightly tousled from the ocean breeze, having spent the afternoon surfing at Malibu, and his face carried the relaxed contentment of someone who had found peace in life's simple pleasures. As Paul moved through the store, he couldn't help but notice the contrast between his unhurried pace and the frantic energy of most other shoppers. Everyone seemed to be in such a rush, checking phones, grabbing items without thought, treating the grocery store like a necessary evil rather than a place where families found sustenance. Paul had learned to appreciate these quiet moments: the normalcy of choosing between different types of bread, the small decision of whether to buy organic apples or regular ones. These were the experiences that kept him grounded in a world that often felt surreal. Near the dairy section, Paul's attention was drawn to a woman and two small children. The mother, who looked to be in her late 20s, wore scrubs that suggested she worked in healthcare, probably a nurse or aide finishing a long shift. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tired ponytail, and her face showed the exhaustion that came from working too many hours and sleeping too few. But it was her children that really caught Paul's attention. The little girl, maybe 6 years old, held tightly to her mother's hand while balancing on one foot, clearly trying to entertain herself during what was obviously a necessary but boring errand. She wore a pink dress that was clean but faded, and her shoes looked like they'd been handed down from someone else. The boy, perhaps 4 years old, sat quietly in the shopping cart's child seat, his large brown eyes taking in everything around him with the patient wisdom that some children develop when they learn early that life requires waiting. What struck Paul most was how well-behaved the children were. They weren't whining or begging for toys or candy like many kids their age might. Instead, they seemed to understand that this trip was about necessity, not wants. The little girl occasionally pointed out items to her brother, whispering observations that made him smile, but neither child asked for anything beyond what their mother was carefully selecting. Paul found himself following at a respectful distance, not stalking, but simply observing as the small family navigated the store with obvious purpose. The mother, whose name tag read Carmen, moved efficiently through the aisles, checking a handwritten list and comparing prices with the practiced eye of someone who had to make every dollar count. Paul watched as she picked up a package of ground beef, looked at the price, then put it back and selected a smaller, cheaper package instead. She did the same with milk, choosing the store brand over name brand, and selected the day-old bread from the discount rack rather than fresh loaves. There was no shame in her careful shopping, just quiet determination. Paul recognized the dignity in her choices. She was providing for her children within her means, making sure they had what they needed, even if it meant sacrificing what they might want. It reminded him of his own mother during his childhood, the way she had stretched every dollar to make sure he and his siblings never felt poor, even when money was tight. As Paul continued shopping, he noticed that Carmen's cart contained mostly basics: rice, beans, pasta, canned vegetables, a small container of yogurt that she'd probably chosen as a treat for the kids. No snacks, no convenience foods, no extras. Everything was nutritious and practical. chosen by someone who understood the difference between wants and needs. The children remained patient throughout the shopping trip, the little girl occasionally skipping a few steps ahead before returning. To her mother's side, the boy pointing out different colored items in the cart and trying to name them. Paul could hear fragments of their conversation, Carmen praising her son for identifying colors correctly, the daughter asking if they could make spaghetti with the pasta, simple family interactions that spoke of love despite financial strain. When Carmen's small family reached the checkout line, Paul deliberately chose the lane next to theirs, wanting to be close enough to help if the opportunity arose but not wanting to intrude on their privacy. As Carmen began placing items on the conveyor belt, Paul watched her children grow more animated, as if they sensed that the shopping trip was almost over and they would soon be home. The little girl pointed to a display of candy bars near the register. "Mommy, look at the pretty colors," she said, not asking for anything but simply sharing an observation. Carmen smiled tiredly. "They are pretty, mija. Maybe someday we'll get some." The phrase, "maybe someday," hit Paul like a physical blow. He'd heard his own mother say those words during his childhood, always with love but tinged with the sadness of not being able to give her children everything they deserved. It was the universal phrase of parents who loved their children enough to dream bigger than their current circumstances allowed. As the cashier began scanning Carmen's items, Paul could see her growing more tense. She opened a small, worn wallet and began counting bills carefully, organizing them by denomination. When the total appeared on the screen, $47.83, Carmen's face fell slightly. She counted her money again, then looked in her purse for change. "I'm sorry," Carmen said to the cashier, her voice quiet but steady. "I think I might be a few dollars short. Could I put back the milk?" The cashier, a teenager who looked bored and impatient, sighed audibly. "You'll have to decide what you don't want." Paul watched as Carmen began the heartbreaking calculation that too many parents knew by heart: which necessities could be sacrificed to make the budget work. She looked at the milk, then at her children, then back at the items on the belt. The little girl seemed to sense something was wrong and moved closer to her mother, instinctively offering comfort. "Mama, it's okay," the little girl whispered, reaching up to touch her mother's arm. "We don't need the milk." The matter-of-fact way the child accepted the situation, her willingness to go without so her mother wouldn't feel bad, was more than Paul could bear. This little girl, barely old enough for kindergarten, was already learning to sacrifice her needs for the sake of her family's dignity. Without hesitation, Paul stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said gently to the cashier. "I'd like to pay for this family's groceries." Carmen turned to him with surprise and immediately shook her head. "Oh no, sir, that's very kind, but we're fine. I can just put back a few items." Paul's voice was warm but firm. "Please, let me help. I insist." Carmen looked at him more carefully, taking in his calm demeanor, his genuine smile, the complete absence of judgment in his expression. "I can't accept charity from a stranger," she said quietly. But Paul could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the weight of too many days of making impossible choices. "It's not charity," Paul replied gently. "It's just one parent helping another." The phrase seemed to resonate with Carmen. She looked down at her children, who were watching the exchange with curious but trusting eyes, then back at Paul. Something in his expression, the kindness, the understanding, the recognition of her dignity even in this moment, made her reconsider. I don't know what to say," Carmen whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Paul smiled at the children, then looked back at their mother. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me do this." He handed his credit card to the cashier, who processed the payment quickly. As the receipt printed, Paul turned to the little girl and boy, kneeling down to their level. "You two are very good helpers for your mom," he said warmly. "She's lucky to have such wonderful kids." The little girl smiled shyly, while the boy reached out and touched Paul's shirt, fascinated by the softness of the fabric. Carmen watched the interaction with growing emotion, seeing how naturally Paul connected with her children, how he spoke to them with genuine respect rather than the condescending tone many adults used with kids. As they prepared to leave, Carmen gathered her courage. "Sir, could I at least know your name? I'd like to be able to thank you properly." Paul hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Paul." "Just Paul." Carmen nodded, still overwhelmed. "I'm Carmen, and these are my children, Sophia and Miguel." Paul waved to the children, who waved back enthusiastically. As Carmen loaded her groceries into her cart, she turned back to Paul one more time. "Paul, I want you to know, this isn't just about the groceries. It's about someone seeing us, really seeing us and choosing kindness. That means more than you'll ever know." Paul felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Carmen, what you're doing, raising those beautiful children, working hard, keeping your family together, that takes real strength. Don't ever forget that." As Carmen's family left the store, Paul finished his own shopping with a heart full of warmth. But he couldn't stop thinking about them, about the dignity with which Carmen faced her challenges, about the patience and understanding of those remarkable children, about the maybe someday that had revealed so much about their daily reality. Over the next few days, Paul found himself returning to that grocery store, hoping to run into Carmen and her children again. He wanted to know more about their story, to understand how he might be able to help in a more meaningful way. On Thursday evening, he spotted Carmen's car, an older Honda with a dent in the side and a small toy hanging from the rearview mirror, in the parking lot of a nearby medical clinic. Paul waited respectfully in his car until Carmen emerged from the clinic with Sophia and Miguel. The children looked tired, and Carmen carried herself with the weary posture of someone dealing with more than just a routine appointment. As they approached their car, Paul got out of his vehicle and walked over casually, as if the meeting were coincidental. "Carmen?" "Hi, it's Paul, from the grocery store the other day." Carmen's face lit up with recognition and genuine warmth. "Paul, what a surprise! Kids, remember the nice man who helped us at the store?" Sophia and Miguel immediately perked up, waving enthusiastically. Paul noticed that Sophia was holding her left arm carefully, and Carmen looked more stressed than she had at the grocery store. "Everything okay?" Paul asked gently, his concern evident. Carmen glanced at her daughter, then back at Paul. "Sophia fell at school and hurt her arm. We just wanted to make sure it wasn't serious." Paul could see the worry in Carmen's eyes, the weight of medical bills and lost work hours adding to her already heavy burden. "Is she all right?" "The doctor says it's just a bad sprain, thank goodness, but she needs to keep it immobilized for a few weeks." Carmen's voice carried relief mixed with underlying stress. Paul knelt down to Sophia's level. "How are you feeling, brave girl?" Sophia held up her bandaged arm proudly. "The doctor said I was very brave, and look, I get to wear this special bandage." Paul smiled at her resilience. "You are definitely brave, and that bandage looks very important." As they talked, Miguel tugged on Paul's shirt and whispered loudly, "We didn't have dinner yet because Mama had to bring Sophia to the doctor." Carmen's face flushed with embarrassment. "Miguel, you don't need to tell everyone our business." Paul looked at the family, Carmen's exhausted face, Sophia's injured arm, Miguel's innocent honesty about their missed dinner, and made a decision. "You know what?" Paul said, standing up. "There's a great family restaurant just down the street. Would you let me buy you all dinner? Nothing fancy, just good food and a chance for Sophia to rest that arm." Carmen immediately began to protest. "Paul, you've already done so much. I can't keep accepting help from you." Paul held up a gentle hand. "Carmen, when someone helps you, they're not just being kind to you. They're being kind to Sophia and Miguel too. And sometimes, accepting help is the bravest thing a parent can do." The truth of his words seemed to reach something deep inside Carmen. She looked at her children. Sophia trying to hide her pain, Miguel clearly hungry after their long afternoon at the clinic, and slowly nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "But just this once," Paul smiled. Just this once. The restaurant Paul chose was a small family-owned Mexican place with worn vinyl booths and the kind of atmosphere that made everyone feel welcome. Carmen seemed to relax slightly as they settled into a corner booth, Sophia carefully positioning her injured arm on the table, while Miguel immediately began coloring on the kids' menu with crayons provided by their waitress. As they waited for their food, Paul learned more about Carmen's story. She was indeed a nurse's aide, working at a nursing home where she cared for elderly residents with the same patience and kindness she showed her own children. She worked as many hours as she could get, but healthcare jobs at her level didn't pay enough to cover all their expenses, especially with the cost of childcare and medical bills. "I keep thinking if I just work a little harder, save a little more, maybe we'll get ahead," Carmen said, watching her children color. "But it feels like every time we make progress, something happens. Sophia's arm, or the car needs repair, or Miguel gets sick." Paul nodded, understanding the impossible mathematics of poverty, how unexpected expenses could derail months of careful planning, how the margin for error became smaller as resources grew thinner. "Where's their father?" Paul asked gently, immediately regretting the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." Carmen's expression grew sadder but not defensive. "He left when Miguel was a baby. Said he wasn't ready to be a father to 2 kids. I haven't heard from him since." The casual way she delivered this devastating information spoke volumes about Carmen's strength. She had absorbed this abandonment, processed it, and moved forward with the business of caring for her children. "That must have been incredibly difficult," Paul said quietly. Carmen shrugged, but Paul could see the pain beneath her composed exterior. "I just decided that my kids deserved better than a father who didn't want to be there. We're better off without someone who doesn't appreciate what a gift they are." Paul looked at Sophia and Miguel, who were now sharing crayons and collaborating on a picture of what appeared to be a house with a garden. Their easy cooperation, their natural kindness toward each other, their patience and resilience, these were children who were being raised with love despite difficult circumstances. "You're an amazing mother," Paul said, and he meant it completely. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "Some days I don't feel like it. Some days I feel like I'm failing them." Paul leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Carmen, those children are happy, healthy, kind, and smart. They're polite to strangers, patient in difficult situations, and they clearly adore you. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because they have a mother who loves them enough to sacrifice for them every single day." When their food arrived, Paul watched as Carmen automatically served her children first, making sure they had everything they needed before taking a bite herself. It was such a small thing, but it spoke to the selflessness that defined her approach to motherhood. As they ate, Sophia told Paul about school, describing her teacher and her favorite subject, art, with the enthusiasm of a child who loved learning. Miguel, not to be outdone, shared his vast knowledge of dinosaurs, naming species with surprising accuracy for a 4-year-old. "They're both so smart," Paul observed. Carmen smiled proudly. "Sophia wants to be a teacher someday. She's always drawing pictures for her classmates and helping the other kids with their letters. And Miguel, he memorizes everything. Sometimes I think he knows more about dinosaurs than the people who study them." Paul could see the dreams Carmen held for her children, the future she was working so hard to make possible. These weren't abstract hopes. They were specific, realistic goals based on her deep knowledge of her children's interests and abilities. As dinner wound down, Sophia began to look tired, her injured arm clearly bothering her more as the day wore on. Miguel had finished eating and was leaning against his mother, content and sleepy. "We should probably get these guys home," Carmen said, though Paul could see her reluctance to end the evening. It had been a break from the constant pressure of her daily life, a chance to simply enjoy her children's company without worrying about the next expense or the next crisis. As they prepared to leave, Paul made another decision. "Carmen, could I ask you something?" She nodded, gathering up her purse and helping Sophia with her jacket. How would you feel about letting me help in a more ongoing way? Not charity, he added quickly, seeing her expression. More like friendship. Support. Carmen studied his face carefully. What do you mean? Paul chose his words carefully. I mean Sophia's medical bills from today. I mean making sure Miguel gets those dinosaur books he's clearly hungry for. I mean helping a family that deserves every good thing life has to offer. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, looking at her children, then back at Paul. Why? She asked simply. Why would you want to help us? Paul smiled, remembering his own childhood, his mother's sacrifices, the kindness of strangers who had helped his family during difficult times. Because everyone needs someone in their corner. Because Sophia and Miguel deserve every opportunity. And because you're the kind of mother who raises the kind of kids who make the world better. Tears began flowing down Carmen's cheeks. I don't know how to accept this kind of help. Paul reached across the table and gently touched her hand. You don't have to know how. You just have to let it happen. As they left the restaurant, Sophia slipped her good hand into Paul's while Miguel held his mother's hand, creating a small chain of connection. In the parking lot, as Carmen was buckling her children into their car seats, she turned to Paul one more time. Paul, I still don't know your last name. I don't know what you do for work or where you live or why you've chosen to help us. But I want you to know that you've given us something more precious than money or groceries or dinner. Paul waited, sensing she had more to say. You've given us hope, Carmen continued, her voice thick with emotion. For the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe we're not in this alone. Maybe there are good people in the world who see families like ours and choose to help instead of judge. Paul felt his own eyes growing misty. Carmen, there are more good people in the world than you know. Sometimes they just need a chance to show it. As Carmen's Honda pulled out of the parking lot, Paul stood watching the taillights disappear into the night. Tomorrow he would start making some phone calls. Sophia's medical bills would be taken care of. Miguel would receive a collection of dinosaur books that would fuel his young imagination. Carmen would find that her next few months of rent had been mysteriously paid in advance. But more than that, Paul had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A reminder of what really mattered. In a world that often felt superficial and disconnected, Carmen and her children had shown him the beauty of real love, real sacrifice, and real strength. 3 months later, Paul was surfing at Malibu when he noticed a familiar figure on the beach. Carmen sat on a blanket with Sophia and Miguel, watching the waves and sharing what appeared to be a picnic lunch. Sophia's arm had healed completely, and she was building an elaborate sand castle while Miguel collected shells to decorate it. Paul caught his next wave all the way to shore and walked over to their blanket, dripping seawater and grinning. Paul! Sophia and Miguel shouted simultaneously, running to give him sandy hugs that he accepted gladly. Carmen looked up with a smile that was different from the tired, stressed expression he remembered. This was the smile of someone who had found her footing again, who was no longer just surviving but beginning to thrive. Look what we built, Miguel announced, pointing proudly to their sand castle. It's magnificent, Paul agreed seriously, examining their architectural achievement with the attention it deserved. As the children returned to their building project, Carmen patted the blanket beside her, inviting Paul to sit. How are things? Paul asked, settling into the sand. Carmen's smile grew even brighter. Good. Really good. Sophia's doing amazing in school. Her teacher says she's reading at a second grade level, and Miguel just started a pre-K program that he absolutely loves. Paul noticed that Carmen looked different too. The lines of constant worry had softened. Her posture was more relaxed, and there was a lightness about her that spoke of reduced stress. And you? Paul asked. How are you doing? Carmen was quiet for a moment, watching her children play. You know what the strangest thing is? It's not just the financial help, though that's been incredible. It's having someone believe in us. Having someone see our family and think we're worth investing in. She turned to look at Paul directly. I got a promotion at work. They're sending me to nursing school part-time and they'll pay for it. I never would have had the confidence to apply if you hadn't shown me that I deserve good things too." Paul felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the California sun. "Carmen, you always deserved good things. I just helped you remember that." As they sat watching the waves, Sophia approached with something in her hands. "Paul, I made this for you," she said shyly, holding out a drawing. The picture showed a man and a woman with 2 children, all holding hands in front of what appeared to be a grocery store. At the top, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for seeing us." Paul looked at the drawing, then at Sophia's earnest face, then at Carmen, who was wiping away tears. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," Paul said to Sophia, and he meant every word. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, Paul helped the family pack up their beach gear. As they prepared to part ways, Carmen touched his arm. "Paul, I finally figured out why you helped us that night in the grocery store." Paul raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" Carmen smiled, looking at her children who were still chattering excitedly about their day at the beach. "Because you're the kind of person who believes that every family deserves a chance. Every child deserves opportunities. Every mother deserves support." She paused, her voice growing softer. "And because maybe, somewhere along the way, someone helped you too." Paul thought about his own childhood, about his mother's struggles, about the teachers and neighbors and strangers who had seen potential in a young boy from a broken home and chosen to invest in his future. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Someone did." As Carmen's family drove away that evening, Paul remained on the beach for a while, holding Sophia's drawing and thinking about the ripple effects of kindness. He had helped one family, but Carmen's confidence had led to a promotion that would change their lives permanently. Sophia's sense of security would help her reach her potential as a future teacher. Miguel's early education would give him tools to pursue his love of learning. But perhaps most importantly, Carmen's children were learning that the world contained people who chose to help rather than judge, who saw families in need and responded with generosity rather than indifference. They would grow up carrying that lesson, and someday they would pass it on to others. Paul Walker understood something that night that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. True success wasn't measured by box office numbers or magazine covers. It was measured by moments like these: a mother's tears of gratitude, a child's drawing, the quiet knowledge that somewhere in the world a family was sleeping peacefully because someone had chosen kindness over indifference. The grocery store receipt from that first night was still in Paul's wallet, not as a memento but as a reminder that the most important role he would ever play wasn't in any movie. It was in the real-life drama of human connection, where the smallest gestures could rewrite entire stories, and where seeing someone truly was sometimes the greatest gift of all. Years later, when Sophia graduated from college with her teaching degree and Miguel received his acceptance to medical school, both on full scholarships they had earned through their own hard work and determination, Carmen would think back to that Tuesday night in a grocery store when a stranger had chosen to see them. She would remember how Paul had said that accepting help was sometimes the bravest thing a parent could do, and she would know that he had been right. Not just about accepting help, but about the courage it took to believe that their family deserved good things. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't money or groceries or even opportunities. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is the belief that they matter, that their struggles are seen, and that their dreams are worth fighting for. And in the end, that's exactly what Paul Walker had given Carmen and her children. That night, the unshakable knowledge that they were seen, they were valued, and they were worth every good thing that life had to offer.